I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted that you're here. Happy Valentine's Day. Around the world, people love. They sing for love. They dance for love. They compose poems, stories, ballets, operas, movies, temples, castles, paintings, and sculptures for love. They have love charms, love potions, love magic. They have myths and legends about love. They pine for love. They live for love. They kill for love. And they die for love. It's one of the most powerful brain systems that has ever evolved. It's much more powerful than the sex drive, I think. You know, if you casually ask somebody to go to bed with you and they say, no, thank you, you don't kill yourself. But around the world, people suffer terribly from love. Homer once called it magic to make the sanest man go mad. The ancient Greeks called this the madness of the gods. I study the brain in love. I and my colleagues Lucy Brown, Art Aaron, and Bianca Acevedo have now put over 75, probably even 100 people into a brain scanner to study the brain circuitry of romantic love. The first were 17 people who were happily in love. The second group were 15 people who had just been rejected in love. And the last, one of the most recent ones was people who were in love long term, which was Bianca's experiment. Was her idea. None of us understood whether we would find anything in the brain. We had all these people who were middle-aged and older maintaining absolutely that they were still madly in love with their partner. So Bianca went ahead and did it, and as you saw, was able to prove it. I don't want to repeat, I generally talk a great deal about romantic love and what we found in the brain. But I want to go on, I have very little time, I want to go on to something that is my newest project. I will just simply say that romantic love is one of the most powerful brain systems that's ever been developed, evolved in humanity. It arises from very primitive brain regions, way below the cortex, way below thinking parts of the brain, to give you the energy and the focus and the motivation to find what I would regard as life's greatest prize, which is a mating partner. Okay. I think it's I think it's an addiction, a perfectly wonderful addiction when it's going well, a perfectly horrible addiction when it's going poorly. We've now proven that at least when you're rejected in love, brain regions linked with profound addiction become activated. I think it's one of three brain systems that evolved from mating and reproduction. One is the sex drive, the craving for sexual gratification. W.H. Auden called it an intolerable neural itch. It's exactly what happens. You can feel the sex drive when you're just driving along in your car. It doesn't necessarily have any particular object to it. The second of these three brain systems is romantic love, what Bianca and I study. G.B. Shaw once he said, love consists of overestimating the differences between one woman and another. And indeed, that's what we do. The passion, the elation, the euphoria, the energy, the motivation, the possessiveness, the intrusive thinking. You can't stop thinking about this person. And the last of these three brain systems is the attachment system, the feeling that you have of cosmic union, often with a long-term partner. And I haven't proved it yet, but I would imagine that that it is all kinds of different combinations of these three very broad, basic neural systems that create the complexity of all of our different feelings of love. But why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? This is what Match.com came and asked me. I'd written 4 books on it. And a couple days before Christmas, they called in 2005, and they asked me to come in 2 days after Christmas. I live in New York City. Nothing happens at Christmas. But I went in anyway. A lot of people filed in. I couldn't figure out who was who. And finally, in the middle of the morning, they said to me, why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? And I said, I don't know. Nobody knows. I do know that timing is important, proximity is important. We tend to fall in love with somebody from the same ethnic and socioeconomic background, same general level of intelligence and good looks and education, somebody with the same religious and social values, although that is actually changing a great deal, someone with the same reproductive goals, and of course your childhood experiences are going to play an enormous role in who you choose. But you can walk into a room where everybody is from your background, same level of education, same general level of good looks, and you don't fall in love with all of them. So it began to occur to me, maybe there's got to be something more to this. Maybe basic biology plays a role. Maybe natural selection didn't just put it to our human whims to fall for him or her. Maybe, in fact, there is basic chemistry that pulls you to one person rather than another. And perhaps if I look at basic body chemistry, I could come to see why we naturally fall for some people rather than others. So I decided I would go through all the academic literature. Oh, yeah. So I began to think, okay, there's two broad basic aspects of personality. There's your nurture, everything you grew up to believe and do and say and think, and there's your nature, all of those traits that come out to at least some extent out of your biology. And we all know some people are more curious than others, some people are more stubborn than others, some are more assertive than others, some are more agreeable than others. And we know that there's some biology to these broad personality styles. Of course, with the new epigenetics, there's going to be a big conversation between your environment and your nature. Nevertheless, I began to think maybe I could look at maybe I could go through the academic literature and see if I could find any trait that is linked with any biological system, and then collect all those traits, create a questionnaire that measures the degree to which you express those traits, and then put this questionnaire on this new dating site that Match.com wanted to start called Chemistry.com, and then watch who is naturally drawn to whom. And so I started in on that project. I'm not going to go through any of this, but bottom line is that there's a lot of human traits that are linked with certain biological systems. For example, if you give a Parkinson's patient L-DOPA, very regularly their creativity will go up. If you take LSD, you are likely to have a religious experience, I'm told, because as you drive up the serotonin system, as you do with LSD and serotonin system, there's genes in the serotonin system that are linked with religiosity. So by spending a couple of years going through every single brain system that I could find and linking those characteristics with each brain system, I came to see that there are basically 4 brain systems that are linked, each one of them with a constellation of personality traits. Now, if I'd found 6 systems, I would add 6 systems. I had 10 systems, I only found 4 systems. Because I was working with a dating service, I had to name these people, and so I named those people who were very expressive of the traits linked with the dopamine system: explorer, builder, director, and negotiator. Not great terms. I'd love to get rid of them, but unfortunately 13 million people have now taken my questionnaire, so I'm stuck with the terms. But I think I'd choose some of those other terms. But anyway, we are all a combination of all of them. These are not cubby holes. They're brain systems. And in fact, somebody who expresses some traits in the dopamine system and somebody else may have exactly the same percentage of it, but express very different traits in the dopamine system. As a matter of fact, what I've done recently with a geneticist from Princeton University is looked at 100,000 people. 30,000 people take this questionnaire every week. As I said, 13 million have taken it in 40 countries. And we looked at 100,000 people. And indeed, no 2 people answered my 56 questions the same way, which didn't surprise me at all. I've never met 2 people who I thought were alike. I'm an identical twin, and we are not alike. No 2 people are alike. But what we found is that these 4 broad styles of thinking and behaving was preserved, even in that 100,000 people. So I'm going to go very rapidly through the traits that are linked with each one of these brain systems, and then go on to tell you 2 studies of 40,000 people each, in which I watched who you're naturally drawn to based on body chemistry. So the first thing, a major trait of the dopamine system is risk-taking, novelty-seeking. It's called sensation-seeking academically. These people are very curious. They have the most interests. They're more likely than any other style to go to college. They make the most money. They lose the most money. They're risk takers. Okay, very energetic, can actually go over the deep end into being very restless or manic. Physical or mental exploration. They don't have to be jumping off of mountains, that they can just be reading 10 hours a day. Very optimistic. Independent, can be quite opportunistic actually. Unreflective, they look out, not in. I'm one of those types, and actually I was making this, I make a lot of speeches to couples therapists, and I remember it was a room of about 6,000 people, and 600 people, and I heard myself say, well, you know, I'm not really interested in who I am. And somebody from the back of the room shouted, "You want to talk about it?" And I didn't really. Impulsive, unpredictable, mentally flexible, open-minded, and idea generation. It is basic to the dopamine system in the brain. I did a study of 178,000 people because I've got all these profiles. And so I did a word study. And it comes out of something, the 1930s, called the lexical hypothesis, where the hypothesis has always been that you use words that actually reflect who you are. And I wanted to know if you use words that reflect who you are biologically. Top word that people most expressive of the dopamine system is adventure, energy, new, fun, traveling, outgoing, passion, and active. Richard Branson's a perfect example. I've always thought rules were made to be broken. Absolutely. Lang Lang, flair, dazzling, charisma, daredevil, extremes, bravado, ebullient, high dopamine, and brilliant pianist. Okay. Well, Chris, can you? I did a study of probably about 500,000 people to see where these people live. They live in the big cities, where the action is. I didn't study Washington, D.C. They're not in Dallas. They're not in Houston, not in Phoenix, not in Las Vegas. That's a different. So the second broad constellation of traits linked with the serotonin system, observing social norms. It's really important. We've now found that in the brain. They're not scared, but they avoid harm. Calm, controlling, and want to control. Plans, routines, schedules, orderly, persistent, concrete, literal, precise, really good with numbers. Oop, sorry. They respect authority, they follow the rules, they tend to be religious and want everybody else to follow their rules. Tend to be loyal. It's a very interesting one. Of all the questions that I asked, this was more mathematically, it fell out so dramatically. The question was something like, would you rather have interesting friends or loyal friends? Now, we all want interesting friends, and we all want loyal friends. So it was one of those forced choice questions. This type has to have loyal friends. The other three type have to have interesting friends. It's a very dramatic and I think biologically based difference. Resistant to change. Top word they use is family, honesty, caring, morals, loyal, trust, values, loving, trustworthy. Hu Jintao, former president of China, is very characteristic of this personality style. In fact, there's genes in this, certain genes for being traditional in the serotonin system, and they're most prevalent in China and Japan. In fact, you could probably do world migrations and understand sort of where these various genes pool, and then begin to understand why their culture is the way it is. Another example is Mitt Romney, very definitely. Onto the testosterone system. They're good at what they call rule-based systems, everything from math, engineering, computers, music. Beethoven was probably very high testosterone. Inventive, exacting, daring, irreverent, rank-oriented. It's called dominance matching. If they attack you and they want you to attack back. Less empathy. It's interesting, our culture really loves empathy, and I can understand why. But for millions of years, we lived in little hunting and gathering groups, and it wasn't always adaptive to be totally empathetic. I mean, if you were going to do your job as a good hunter, you couldn't be weeping as you slit the throat of a baby gazelle or marched into an enemy camp. So bottom line is there's reasons why less empathy is linked with the testosterone system. Emotionally contained. I had a girlfriend who, her husband, she said to her husband some time ago, she said, you know, you haven't told me that you love me in a month. And he said, well, I said it a month ago and nothing's changed. And mind blindness, academic term for the inability to climb into somebody's head and figure out what they're doing. Matter of fact, I even think the evolution of crying tears. All kinds of animals cry, they whimper, but they don't cry tears. And it may, the whole evolution of tears may have been just so that he gets it. He can see that you really are upset. Tough-minded, decisive, bold, and they get to the point. These are the kind that'll shout, get to the point. Top words they use, real. They gotta have it real. Steve Jobs is a perfect example. Svengali, Mercurial, these are brutally honest. They're very honest. Hillary Clinton is a good example, I think. When asked why she was attracted to Bill, she said, he wasn't afraid of me. There's many more men in this. When you take a look around the world, everywhere that we studied, there's more men in this high testosterone category, but there's a certain number of women. And then the last category, I call it web thinking. It's the way estrogen washes over the brain and the womb. It begins to build more connections between the two hemispheres and more long-distance connections between different sorts of factories, giving this sort of brain a very global, holistic, long-term, contextual perspective. Imaginative, mentally flexible, indecisive. They can't make up their mind. Very fine executive social skills, reading posture, gesture, tone of voice. Theory of mind is a new term for being intuitive, being able to climb into somebody's head and realize what they're thinking about. Nurturing, trusting. Trusting is an interesting one. Anthropologists have never really understood why the evolution of trust, because it seems so unadaptive if you trust the wrong person. But the reason I linger on it is because if you know and read people properly, it's metabolically very adaptive to be able to, if you can figure out who to trust, you're saving a lot of metabolic energy when you do it, and hence the evolution of it. So it's so interesting how, you know, one trait will piggyback on other traits to create a constellation of traits. Introspective, everything means something to these people. As Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Not to them. Everything means something to them. Agreeable, they'll never hit you in the face, they'll stab you in the back. Emotionally expressive, and diplomatic intelligence. Passion, real, heart, kind, sensitive, sweet, random, and empathetic. Not too many men would say the only time I have made a bad decision is when I didn't follow my instinct. That's a very high estrogen type of statement. Bill Clinton, I think our first female president, actually, highly synthesizing mind. Whole world knows he can't stop talking. Really good with people. He's the one that cried at his daughter's wedding. And actually, he's got a very high estrogen face, the soft eyebrows, and the very round face, etc. Charles Darwin, of course, was the greatest synthesizer of all living creatures and a tremendous explorer, very expressive of both, I think, the dopamine and the estrogen system. But this is not what Match.com cared about. Match.com wanted to know why you fall in love with one person rather than another. And so once I began to dope out these broad styles of thinking and behaving, and began to have people take the questionnaire, on Chemistry.com, this dating site, I could then watch who was naturally drawn to whom. And as I've mentioned twice in 2 experiments with 40,000 people, it's just numbers. It's all anonymous. You're not allowed to break in ever to these membership groups. But mathematically, I can watch it all the time. And as it turns out, I had this hypothesis that you would be attracted to your opposite, biologically your opposite. And I was half right and half wrong. Among those who are the explorer type, the novelty-seeking, risk-taking, curious, creative, they want somebody like themselves. They want somebody who will leap off the couch at 7:30 and go over to Lincoln Center and just buy the last 2 tickets to the opera. Or for that matter, go to New Guinea tomorrow. The high serotonin type, what I call the builder, traditional, cautious, more conventional, follows the rules, respects authority. They want people like themselves, somebody just as traditional. But the other 2 types, like their opposite. The high testosterone tends to gravitate to the high estrogen, and the high estrogen to the high testosterone. I think a very good example are Hillary and Bill Clinton. He being the high estrogen in this case, and she being the high testosterone. I then go on to, I wrote a book on it called Why Him, Why Her. I then go on to explain why I think from a Darwinian evolutionary perspective, these various natural chemical attraction systems evolved, but I don't have time for that. And I'll just go on to say a couple things. Our newest research is with Bianca and with Dr. Lucy Brown at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And we've now put 45 people into the brain scanner and had them also take my personality questionnaire. And this is the most important slide of my life, actually. I'm not going to go into it except to say that in every case, it did seem to play out the way one would expect. People who scored high on the estrogen system showed more activity in the mirror neurons linked with empathy. People who scored high on the serotonin system showed more activity in a brain region linked with no social norm compliance, and on and on. We're beginning to map some of the biology of personality. Now, this isn't to say that we are puppets on a string of DNA. We've got a huge cerebral cortex with which we make decisions. You know, I mean, you could be, you know, predisposed to alcoholism and give up drinking. You can be just predisposed to being angry and losing your temper and understand how to handle it. But the bottom line is I'm trying to fill in the second half of the puzzle, which is not only your childhood and your experiences, but the biology of who you naturally are. So we're also hopefully down the road with Lee Silver from Princeton. We're going to isolate 63 or 4 genes and see if we can't get almost actually a genome-wide association studies to understand some of the biology of personality. So I am also starting to, a little business, I want to bring some of these ideas into the business world. I'd like to bring it into a parenting world. In fact, when I wrote this last book, I sent a rough draft to my editor, and I knew when he called he was going to tell me what he thought of it. And he did call, and there was this long pause, and then he said, I finally understand my son. And I do think that it can be applied to not only love, but to business and to any other part of human life. So I'm going to close with this. For millions of years, we lived in little hunting and gathering groups. There were probably, anthropologists think, about 25 individuals to a hunting and gathering band. About 50% of them, 10 to 12 of them, were children and adolescents. That leaves about 12 grown-ups. They're all walking along grasslands of Africa, and they go over a hill, and they suddenly see some mushrooms. You can't have a whole lot of high dopamine explorer types saying, let's try all the mushrooms. You got to have some builder types who say, this is not in our tradition. We've never tried these mushrooms before. You got to have some high testosterone type who say, oh, let's feed the mushrooms to the dog and see what happens. Some little inventiveness. And you need some of the more estrogen expressive type who's going to say, let's sit down here and talk about these mushrooms and pool all of our data. Bottom line is, I'm a group selectionist. I think that personality styles evolved as a group, and I think that We were built to put our heads together. And in fact, I think that we've often been told that the golden rule is to treat others as you want to be treated. But in fact, I really think it's the understanding other people, reaching into their mind, understanding who they are. And in that way, we can make much finer love and partnership relationships. Thank you.